Life Over Coffee. Conversations for transformation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Rick Thomas at Life Over Coffee. Our street address is lifeovercoffee.com. I call it our coffee shop, a sanctification center in cyberspace. It is a place where you can go. Anyone who has access to the internet can go to our coffee shop. And we have thousands upon thousands of resources, and they are free to you. We provide these resources because we want people to come together to do life over coffee, to get together and talk about those things that are most important to you over coffee or your beverage of choice. And so we branded our ministry Life Over Coffee because that is our heart, that is our mission, to share the practical message of Christ. I envision two people getting together, and it doesn't have to be what they call biblical counseling, just friend on friend, talking about the things that are important, working through situational challenges, relational dust-ups, personal problems. What we want to do is to provide the content, the resources that you can use to help a friend, also to help yourself. And so please access our resources. We are underwritten by a donor community, and that's why we're able to give these things away. And so we want you to benefit from it. Lifeovercoffee.com. Now, what I want to talk about over the next few moments is how to overcome sin and temptation. This is a universal struggle. This is something that we all have to deal with. And when will these sins and temptations be over? It'll be the day that we meet Jesus. And so this is a lifelong struggle. We call this progressive sanctification. After God regenerates a person, they are born again, then they enter this process of maturing in the faith, growing up in the faith. And so they need tools, they need resources, they need ways to think about how to overcome their personal problems, their struggles, their temptations. And that's what I want to talk about over the next few moments. The New Testament provides us three ways to help people to think about and work through their temptations. As I understand the New Testament, those three ways are to amputate a problem off, to mortify a problem, and the limitation of a problem. And I'll talk about those in detail in just a moment. But those are the three main categories. You can remember them this way: amputation, mortification, and limitation. And I'll provide scripture here and give you some ways to consider that. And then also I'm going to appeal to you to have a conversation for transformation with a friend. And so resolving debilitating short-term or lifelong habits, it doesn't always happen the same for all people. Not only are there different strokes for different folks, but there can be different strokes for each person depending on how a specific temptation causes them to stumble or stall. And so each individual will have to think through, what does amputation mean to them? Because it can be something different for them than the next person. And I will explain. That's why we don't want to do cookie cutter discipleship. One size fits all. I can give you these three ways to overcome temptation and sin, and you're going to find out that some of them overlap with you and intersect with another person as you work on recurring patterns in your life. And so I'll give you the three categories, talk through each one of them, and then ask God to give you insight on how to make unique application to you. And then as you're interacting with friends in a small group context, your local church, doing life over coffee, at the workplace, or in the academy, you'll have to ask the Lord, the Spirit of God, to illuminate your mind and how you can bring these three ideas together for your friend to help them to work through whatever unique challenges they may have. And so let's talk about amputation first. Now, the text of Scripture here that you're familiar with, it's Matthew 5, verses 29 and 30. I'll give you part of it. This is Jesus talking. He says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And that's where we get the idea of amputation. he says, and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Now, in this passage, Jesus is teaching us that if your eye sins against you, then you should pluck out your eye. Or if your hand offends you, then you should cut off your hand and throw it away. Now, as far as a tip and communication and language, if you haven't heard the word hyperbole, then you want to add that to your vocabulary. You want to look up the definition of it, and you want to use it 3 times today so that you can own this word. Because this is hyperbolic language that Jesus is using, meaning he is amplifying an idea, exaggerating an idea. He is using clickbait, so to speak, to grab your attention, to see the severity of the issue, but he's not meaning this literally. It would be profoundly tragic for anyone to make the words of Jesus here a literal mandate for mutilation. That is not what he is doing. And you want to learn to use hyperbole appropriately, especially when you're working with someone and you want them to see the seriousness of what you're talking about. You want to grab their attention without over sensationalizing, and you do want to make sure that they understand what you are saying. So Jesus is using cutoff language, amputation, to show the severity of our habituations and how to think about and how to respond to sin patterns and problems. Sometimes you should cut off things that tempt you to sin. 2 Timothy 2:22, Paul was talking about this. Flee fornication. You want to run from it. You want to cut it off, so to speak. We're talking about behavioral modification here. That's the cultural term. And in context, there's nothing wrong with behavioral modification. You actually want to use it, and you want to use it often. And maybe there's some things that you want to examine. Maybe there's some things that you need to cut off from your life because the association of these things draws out temptation in your heart. It's not necessarily that the thing is sinful, but this is what I was saying earlier about the uniqueness of our sin and temptation. For example, some of you should say no to food or certain kinds of food. But that is not a universal mandate for all people to cut off certain kinds of food. But there's some things that you may need to amputate from your life, specifically food. And then someone else needs to resist the temptation of shopping, over-shopping, overspending. They shop too much. They see it online, the convenience of online shopping, and then it shows up at their door, box after box after box. It's a temptation, so they need to cut this off. Don't go to the store. Have accountability for what you're doing online. Many years ago, probably 2.5 decades, I would imagine, when I was leading the counseling ministry at our local church, we got together a team and we went over to this family's house because they had a lot of problems, but one of those was overspending and just buying things. And as they took out, it was either 2 or 3 dumpster loads of junk in their house. There were actually unopened boxes in the garage that they had ordered from online. This was like the TV show, I don't remember what it was, but the TV show where you see these things, there's a million of them, and then you just order them, and they just had unopened boxes that just came and just was in the garage that had never been used. They needed to cut that off. Some people need to cut off certain foods. Others need to cut back on their shopping habits. Some others need to turn off the television. Sports probably would be an addictive avenue for some people. And then, of course, binge watching. Television has become a thing now because we have TV on demand. All we have to do is say yes to it, and we find ourselves binge watching as a way of escaping whatever our problems may be. Television is not sinful in itself, neither is shopping, and most definitely food. These things are not necessarily evil, but this is what behavioral modification is. This is one way to overcome sin and temptation: amputation. Some of us should walk away from social media, or at least mitigate it significantly. Some should stop flirting with the opposite sex. Some should get up on time and go to bed on time. Amputate things out of your life that will create situations where you can get to bed on time and force yourself to get up on time. Some people should put restrictions on their computer. It would probably be a good exercise to do Life Over Coffee with a friend and talk about the things that tempt you. This is where different strokes for different folks will come into play, and you'll find that your temptations are different and the external habits that you have in your life are different. And in Jesus, the way he talked about it is that when you have these external habits and behaviors in view in Matthew 5, 29 and 30, then the cutting off methods can sometimes accomplish the instantaneous cessation of sin, though that is not always the case. In other situations, the battle is more intense and is internal, where cutting off the sin out of your life does not end the temptation. There is more work to do in the heart. But I'll talk about that. We're talking about mortification at that point, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. James 1, by the way, would be a good verse to take down. 14 and 15, he talked about that the desire is in our heart. It's not this legalistic thing. If you are prone to legalism, to where you create what they call degrees of separation from things externally in your life, as though that's going to be the cessation of sin, you may be in for a rude awakening, because the sin is actually in our hearts. And so the cutting off of something doesn't create the amputation of sin. It just gets it out of your life so that you're not drawn to it by what is in your heart. There's also another counterintuitive thought that I want to introduce here, and that is why ongoing temptation continues in a person's life, because some people will say, when will this temptation ever go away? Now, this is highly subjective, but I know that this is true. A counterintuitive thought is that the ongoing temptation can be a measure of God's kindness to you. Is it possible that the Lord may allow your struggles in your life to help you to draw closer to Him? Paul talked about this in 2 Corinthians 1. He said, I don't want you to be unaware of what was going on in our life, that God was teaching us not to rely on ourselves, but to rely on Him who raises the dead. Could it be that God permits things in our lives to teach us to draw closer to Him? Paul talked about it again in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10, the thorn in the flesh. God would not remove the thorn in Paul's flesh. Never, ever. If Paul came to you as your counselee, and he says, I got this thorn in my flesh, whatever that was, I am unsure. And as a counselor, he said, well, we have the Word of God, we have the Spirit of God, we have the community of God. We can overcome this, Paul, and we're going to overcome it. Well, the truth is, as we look in the rearview mirror, he never did overcome it. And we also know why. God told Paul that through your weakness, my strength is perfected. And Paul said back, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And so this is a counterintuitive thought. I'm not saying that you should quit trying. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that you should resign yourself to ongoing temptation in your life. I am saying that you do have to consider this aspect of a theology of suffering, that it could be that God permits some things in our lives to show us His power, to experience His strength through our weakness. Perhaps reading the story of Joseph beginning in Genesis 37 would reveal how the Lord uses sin sinlessly to mature us in the faith. But even inside that story, we do see Joseph cutting off, amputating Potiphar's wife. He did. He ran. He got out of there. He behaviorally modified the situation because he was living in a sinful context from chapter 37 to the rest of his life. He never left Genesis or never left Egypt alive. But even in the context of living in this trying time that never went away, there was amputation that was involved in part of what he was going through. Now, regardless, we should consider the grace of amputation and how behavioral modification could be a great start to removing sin from our lives. And then there's mortification. This is Romans 8:13. Paul said it this way, "For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live." Now this phrase here, put to death, that is the old English word, mortification. So in Romans, Paul introduces another idea for overcoming sin problems in addition to what Jesus introduced, amputation. And what Paul is saying is that it speaks more to our hearts. He asks us to mortify the deeds of the body. Now again, you're going to read to make dead probably in your Bible, to put to death. Mortification is different from cutting off behaviorally. Mortification suggests that you may need another method to overcome sin, something deeper. Sometimes you amputate the problem from your life. Other times you mortify it. In some situations, you may do both. You amputate it to get it out of your life, and then you begin to work on the lust, the craving, the desire in the heart. The mortification of sin reduces the vitality of something until it dies. That's really the idea, is taking the strength out of that thing. That is what mortification is. It takes the strength away. I have often illustrated this by using the common cold analogy. I can wipe our child's nose, amputation, behavioral modification, and it will take away the manifestation of the problem while bringing external help, external comfort, albeit it would be limited comfort in the moment, and she would appreciate that. But the problem, I know, as a parent, is deeper than external solutions. This is the common cold. The disease is in the body. There needs to be an internal solution. Therefore, I give our child medicine, another behavioral modifying thing. And I trust overall, in the long term, though, it will do more than just bring immediate comfort, reduce the fever, help her to rest at night. What I'm really after is to render dead the disease that is literally defiling her inside. I can tell our child to stop coughing, which would actually probably just exasperate her. She can't quit no matter how much fussing that I do. It is going to take time. The mortification of sin is a matter of the heart. It's going to take time. Amputation is like switching off a switch off, a light off. You just boom, it's off. You amputate, behavioral modify. You struggle with alcohol. You're going to take a new route to work. You're not going to drive by the liquor store. Boom, you just take it. But the lust for that alcohol, that is different. And so I used food earlier. You amputate food out of your life. That may work for some in its entirety, but for others, there's a deeper issue that they have to mortify, and that is their lust for food. Now that's a heart issue. And so they would amputate, and then they will begin to mortify. Another mortification sin is bitterness towards someone who wronged you. Perhaps all of you have been there. I have. You can't just turn the switch off on bitterness. You got to do that internal work of the heart. Wrongly motivated by guilt is another. Talk about false guilt here. Afraid of what others think of you. Fear of man is a deep habituation in people's lives. And probably they would love to amputate it. Boom. I'm not managed by other people's opinions any longer. Nah, it probably won't work that way. Worry about making a poor decision. The person that's paralyzed by decision making, indecisive, they struggle with worry and anxiety. They'll have to work hard with God to take the strength out of that sin and that sin pattern. Regretting a wrong choice from the past. People who live looking in the rearview mirror. If I only had done this and only done that, they live in this perpetual regret. That is a sin pattern in their life that they just can't cut off. By the way, that's why we want to be patient with people. There would be a temptation here, it could be, that we look at them because there's different structure, different folks, but we don't recognize that. And it's like, dude, get over yourself already. Well, they're not you. And though that comes easy for you, you're not tempted that way. I'm sure that if they spent enough time investigating, not that they would want to do this, go on a sin hunt with you, but I'm sure if they did, they would find things that they can overcome easily, that they don't struggle with at all, but you do. And so we want to make sure that we have the log appropriately placed in our eye as we go speck fishing with other people. One more is anxiousness. It's kind of tied to worry, but I want to give another line item here for worry, anxiousness. I talked about worry about about making a poor decision. I talked about regret for a wrong decision that's been made in the past. And now I want to talk about anxiousness about how God views us, because people struggle that way. How does God see me? Many times they map over their familial experience when they were growing up, and they see God the same way or a similar way that they would see earlier authoritarians in their life. And so they can be anxious or worry about how God views them. And so we want to carefully help them to mortify that, to take the strength out of that and to make it dead. There are three ways to overcome sin and temptation. You amputation, you mortify, mortification, and then the third one is limitation. We see this in Hebrews 12:1. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. And let us run the race with endurance, the race that is set before us. And so he's talking about laying aside every weight. The picture here is obvious. You're running around the track, you're running down the road, and you want to do that with fluidity. You want to do that with lack of impediment. And so you lighten your load so that you can run as fast and as far as you possibly can without carrying a heavy load. And so you limit things out of your life, things that will hinder you. And so the Hebrew writer is teaching us to lay aside any weight hindering us, basically. He's not saying that a hindrance is a sin. Now that's something you want to think about here. It doesn't have to be a sin. It can be a negative influence. It can be something slowing us down. Sometimes non-sin things can be sinful to someone, which is why you limit the practice of or the participation in those activities for that person. Not you, but for them. You may not be able to make a biblical case for it being a sin for all your friends. Say, this is not a sin for you. But I have to be self-aware. I have to be honest about how temptation grabs my heart. And this is where we want to be careful about judging people. Come on, man, get over yourself. No, you don't understand. This is a temptation in my life for whatever reasons they may be. And so you want to circumvent that. And you can do that by limiting it. You don't want to circumvent putting Christ on display in the most effective ways in your life. And so there are many illustrations of non-sin things that can be sinful to a unique individual. Television, technology, shopping, alcohol, friends, social media, money. Those are just a few examples of non-sin things that can work against us, even to the point of our hearts leading us to sin. So it's important to have a comprehensive understanding of our temptations, our weaknesses, our sin patterns, so that we can be vigilant in refraining from the things that keep the Lord's glory from being reflected in our lives. We must think realistically and practically about how and why we sin, and the biblically informed methods that enable us to conquer the things that want to defeat us. Our efforts, what we do here, they happen under and in and through and by the empowering favor of God. I mean, think about the grace of God. It is the grace of God that empowers us to even think like this. It is the grace of God that enables us to put these practices together. The world, they can only come up with best practices in behavioral modification and whatever the tip of the day is, or whatever is wafting through the cultural space, the latest fad, best practices to try to be the best versions of themselves. We all do this under and in and through and by the empowering favor of God, the grace of God. We can defeat the enemy's enticements, and we can keep from his entanglements as we respond to the Lord's grace, to his practical mercy in our lives. I want to wrap up by asking you just a few questions. I would love for you to use these as you interact with others, as you do life over coffee. Question number one is, what are your struggles? It's just that simple. What are your struggles? What is one struggle that you have? Number two, how do you fight the battle against sin? And so now take that struggle that you have and run it through these three categories for overcoming sin and temptation: amputation, mortification, limitation. How do you fight the battle against sin? Number three, do you have clear sin categories? What I mean by that is, do you call what you do sin when it is sinful? Or do you round the corners off your sin by relabeling it, redefining it, minimizing it? Those are all tactics that are designed to soothe the conscience so it doesn't sound so bad, so we can look better to others, we can present ourselves in a better light. That is a dangerous thing, because once we begin to rationalize what we do or justify what we do, we'll take the edge off of what we do and we'll not have clear categories. The Bible gives us clear categories for what we do, and we want to operate within biblical nomenclature, because as you saw what Jesus said in Matthew 5, it kind of gets your attention. If your eye offends you, pluck it out. I mean, he's using this strong hyperbolic language to get our attention, because he knows that our tendency is to soften the blow, to round the corner, to round the corners off, to make it not sound as harsh, to make it more palatable to our tongues. And so we want to make sure that we have clear categories, and we're not weakening what we're doing by renaming it, relabeling it, or redefining it. Number four, have you permitted your friends to speak into your life? Have you asked them, here's the deal, and I want you to speak into my life? Number five, have you shared with them how you sin and how you are tempted to sin? I'm not talking about going on social media. I'm talking about at least one other person in your life that you can share with. This is how I struggle. This is a recurring temptation in my life, and I want you to step into my life. Number six, this is the last one. What does this quote mean to you? Quote, the gospelized person is free. He has nothing to hide, nothing to protect, and nothing to fear. He radically battles sin in the context of a community of friends. I would love for you to take all six of these questions and have a conversation for transformation with a friend. Let them know that you're working on a particular issue. Walk them through the three ways that you want to wrestle with it: mortification, or amputation, mortification, limitation. And then y'all brainstorm and then pray. And if we can help you, go to our coffee shop. It's in cyberspace. It's our sanctification center. It's lifeovercoffee.com. And get the resources that you need. and then use them as you continue to fight the battle for God's glory, for your personal transformation, for the benefit of your close sphere of friends, and as a light to the world, showing that we have a way, and His name is Christ.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.